Hello everybody, welcome back to Hot Seat with Thulisa. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today we're talking about racism. I remember, I think it was about 1994 when Mandela took over as the president of the ANC and president of the country. And his words were, you know, he fought against black domination, he fought against white domination. And, you know, all he wanted was a rainbow nation. He spoke about forgiveness. You know, and I even remember in 1995 when we won the Rugby World Cup, you know, he was at the stadium and it seemed that we were all united and we were all together. But I mean, the question I'm asking today with my guest is, do we have a rainbow nation today? Have we achieved what Mandela wanted to achieve with South Africa 27 years later, you know, in democracy? Welcome to Hot Seat with Thulisa, guys.
Thank you.
Allan, Thulisa, thank you so much for agreeing to talk about this weird subject. As I think as South Africans, you know, we don't really want to talk about racism. And we believe that because it has been abolished, you know, and because in 1994 we went into a democratic South Africa, we want to assume that it's gone. We want to assume that it's not there anymore. But a lot of people in South Africa still experience racism, and that's the reason why I wanted to chat to you guys today. I'm going to start with you, Allan.
Sure.
I read a book by Robin, and in her book called Racism, she says that racism is a white problem. She also says that it was created by white people, and it's wielded by white people, but it also benefits white people. So my question to you today is, do you feel that racism has benefited you today?
So I think
as a white person?
Short answer is yes. Would you like me to expand on it and take a look at the question a bit deeper?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
So I think, you know, let's take a look at the statement that you made firstly. You know, for me, if you really want to understand the question, we need to unpack it deeply. So Maria has basically said that racism is a white thing, created by whites, wielded by whites, benefits whites. Okay. So, you know, I think if we look at it holistically, why is that? I agree with her to a certain degree, but I also disagree with her.
Okay.
For me, what is the definition of racism? Let me ask you that, if I could.
I mean, I'm happy for anyone. Thulisa, do you want to define racism for us?
You know, racism classically is any form of prejudice that's based on the color of your skin or race, right?
Right.
But now when we speak about, I'm going to bring in a radical view by Louis Farrakhan, who always says we know about racism in terms of me not appreciating him or liking him because he's white, or him not liking me because I'm a black woman. But why don't we call it colorism?
That's actually,
we've got different colors.
Yeah.
It's racism because it also becomes a socio-economic race in terms of
pause for me there. I want to go back to Allan.
Okay.
Around unpacking the yes, how have you benefited?
Okay. So I'm still looking at the statement made. So per Tuli's definition, I'd like to add one more thing.
Yes.
So for me, the classic definition of racism is one race being or seeing themselves as superior to another race. Okay. So if I take a look at the statement that you just made, it's being put forward that it's only the white race that can be racist. It's only the white race that can wield racism. So inferring that the white race is morally inferior to all other races. So simply that statement by itself is racist by taking the standpoint that all other races are morally superior to whites because they cannot be affected by racism. They cannot be racist themselves. So can you see that how that statement in itself is the classic definition of a racist statement? Okay.
No, I see. I see that.
So firstly, that's the one point that I wanted to make. The second point that I wanted to make in terms of benefiting from racism in South Africa, I want us to unpack why has this happened? Like, why we got to this space in humanity. And for me, I look at it as purely natural. A natural progression of human evolution to get us to the point where we are now. So if we take a look back 100,000 years, Everybody originated in Africa. Africa is the home of humanity. This is where humans developed, we evolved. Everybody moved. We had our own tribes. Everybody's tribe, we want to get away, we want to have our own space, we want to be happy in our own space. So everybody over the last 100,000 years has moved and migrated across the world. Let me ask you this. So racism is a white issue, okay? Was there racism 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago to the degree that there is today?
I don't know.
Well, okay, I'll answer that. I'll say no. Simply by the mere fact that the races were confined to the geographical area they evolved in. So you can't be racist for the classic definition if there's only whites around. You can't be racist if there's only blacks around. So for me...
So I hear what you're saying, Allan, and I think for me, you know, perhaps the statement is linked directly to a particular system which existed in this country, right? So as much as you explain, you know, how Africa started and how everybody moved, and this statement perhaps does not only say that any other race can't experience, you know, can't be racist towards other races. But this statement, for me, especially the part that says it was created by white people, right?
Yes.
Yeah, right? So it's got to do with a particular system in this country.
Correct. And where does that system come from? Where did the system come from? So if we take a look at the progression of humanity over the last, 500 years, what allowed white people to colonize the rest of the world? What was it? For me, if I look at it, it was the Industrial Revolution that allowed the white people to rise above other races and cultures, purely technologically. The Chinese must be doing their heading that the British took the gunpowder and modified it to a form that they could use it in a weapon to overthrow other countries.
Yeah.
And if we take a look at humanity, that is how people exist. It's my tribe versus your tribe. There's always a you or a me versus them.
Correct.
So, you know what? Let's take it back to when colonization started. The white race only knew the white race. So we get somewhere else and what? They're not like me. Looks, culture, so many others. So instantly, it's me versus them. And on that basis, we start to devise a racist mentality by simply creating a difference between me and you. If I'm a white male and you're a black female, I've labeled myself as a white male, I've labeled you as a black female. What does that mean? Okay, well, a white male, X, Y, Z. To be a white male, I need to adhere to these characteristics, these behaviors, this society norm. For a black female, you need to do the same. So if I have a perception of you as a black female and as me as a white male, it's guaranteed that I will be, to a degree, racist. Because there's a difference between us. But J. Krishnamurti, you said, if you call yourself Indian, you are perpetuating violence. If you call yourself Christian, you are perpetuating violence. If you call yourself Muslim, you are perpetuating violence. And I'll take it a step forward and say, if you call yourself black, you are perpetuating violence. If you call yourself white, you are perpetuating violence. Whatever race that you identify with creates a boundary between me and my fellow human being, where there is no boundary. The boundary only exists in our minds by classifying a person as black, white, and then adding a descriptive context to that. Whereas if we are able to drop all of that, there is no racism. But we can't drop all of that. I don't think we're able to drop all of that because this was a design system. So this is where we go. This is where we go, and I want to bring you in, Thulisa.
The resource issue.
Yeah.
So the statement that says it's racism is created by white people, therefore is a white problem. As a black woman, I know that slavery was not created by black people.
That is true.
A. B. We're sitting on top of a very inflammatory land issue currently because we are aware that the Dromedaris lands in the Cape are resources. So how do we get to a point where all our gold, all our diamonds, all our platinum and all those resources are not in our hands and in our control? Hence the term white supremacy. So it's not only, you know, the white person looking at the black woman and looking at the values, the variance in values, and I want to colonize you to become Christian. In that process, I've now taken away your land. There's been forced removals during apartheid. So I've moved you from this estate into a small little corrugated iron shack or umkuku. And I've now moved in members of my tribe in a space that you identify as your ancestral land. So your children or your descendants essentially are going to look at me and of course resent me. Because my great-grandmother, Penny, lived over there. That was our family land. That's where we performed our rituals. Whether I, the person who came in and took them, understood them or not. So there is that. And how do we get to a stage where you are arrested and placed in Robben Island for coming up and standing up against it and saying, this is not right. Yes, we're different. Yes, we have misunderstandings, but let us be in control of our own resources or let there be equal share. So when we look at racism and globally, you look at the mid-Atlantic slave trade, it's the same thing. People have been displaced from their motherland and cut off from their cultures. They are Black Americans today. There are Black people living in the Caribbean who have had no voice, no resources, because we all know about the Black ghettos. So the African diaspora extends. It's not just an issue in Africa. This becomes global.
Sure.
And those Black people that have come up and educated themselves and integrated into this modern urban society are in the minority. Penny, you and I speaking this kind of English, in understanding what Allan is saying without marching to his house with guns blazing, wanting to kill him, is because we also, as Black people, are not homogenous amongst ourselves. So these levels of resentment will also differ. The further down you go, the poorer the person is, the more displaced the person is, the angrier they are. And the more intensely they sense and feel this racism. So someone like myself who's now grown up in the burbs, has gone to school with white people, I've worked in corporate with other white people, I could easily show up as a Black woman and say, no, I think we're doing fine. But
because your circumstances are fine.
My socioeconomic circumstances are different.
And I think that's why I wanna bring it to the South African context. Obviously, I love how you've explained what this looks like globally. But I want to bring it to the South African context because I do think that what Allan mentioned earlier on around, racism for many of us was first a black and white thing. And there's since, there's different segments, there's different, and there's colors, there's Indians, and in all these different races, I'm sure there's races that believe that they're more superior than the others. And as a result, we see it. But I guess, it was a system that was designed that the whites are better, they're first in this country.
Definitely stratification.
And then obviously there comes the next and the next, and the Black was at the bottom. And I remember reading a line in Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom where he was explaining the type of food that the different races had in Robben Island. I mean, certainly the coloureds had an option between cereal and porridge. And then the Indians didn't have the option, but their porridge was with butter and sugar. And then, the Blacks, there was no butter, there was no sugar. So that already in its own tells you that systematically it was designed that these ones are better, these ones are slightly better, these ones, bottom, and then those ones are the worst.
Can you see that that's absolute human nature, though? In terms of classifying people and treating them according to that classification. So if we go back before any kind of colonization took place, even in England itself, if you were born into a certain family, you were worthy to talk to another family because you were at a certain level, you were in a certain class. So even within the races, if you look at the Indian race, India, I mean, this blew my mind when I figured it out, specifically considering their religious teachings, that there are levels of society in India that you are unclean, you are considered an unclean, dirty, and if you touch that person needs to go purify themselves. It's the same race. And if we look within every race, we'll find that level of discrimination within every race. Because we're human, and that's how our brain works. So I'm going about evolution. I'm talking about the physical evolution of how we got to colonization and how humans got here, our tribe. But if we take a look at that, we can also see the evolution of morality, the evolution of consciousness that goes with it. So 400 or 500 years ago, hell, are we crucifying people today? There's no crucifixion taking place. There's nobody being put up on crosses. And are we having impaling in KZN in what Chaka did to anybody he disagreed with? So the morality of people, we've realized along the way of what's right and what's wrong. And I truly believe that we are improving in that regard. It's not guaranteed that we're going to get to the end goal of seeing everybody as ourselves or as a manifestation of God. I mean, if we see God, if I see God in you and I see God in me, how can I judge you? Because you're God.
Absolutely. And I agree with you, Allan, to a certain degree, and I do think that this is a journey and it's an evolution. But you know, it's unfortunate that for South Africans, you know, it was further enforced. So while it's in humans, and it's a phenomenon of humans, it was further enforced by the system, right? Now the system, you know, I think 1994 is when we, So that kind of changed for us, you know, for South Africans in '94. There was hope. You know, as black people, there was a feel of there's a voice. Even the colors, even Indians felt that there's now a voice, and I'm not seeing, certainly I'm not seeing progress, and that's and my not seeing progress doesn't mean it's not there, and this is why we're having this conversation, and which leads me to my next question to you, Thulisa, to say, do you feel that as a black person today, you know, the playing field has been leveled? Like, do you feel that everyone has an equal opportunity?
No. Definitely not. And this takes us back to stratification, right? In South Africa, Allan is saying stratification is part of human nature, right?
Right.
Agreed. Even back in our own motherland, before colonization, we had the royal families.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
We had the lower caste of people and tribes, such that you still see people espouse those values today, where they pouch their lips and beat themselves on the chest.
Even today, the language thing also is a differentiator.
I'm from a royal family, and this is a black person, and I expect you to bow to me and say right. We have that, but in South Africa, it was legalized. It was made part of the law to say, you will stratify along racial lines.
Yes.
So it was not just about class and socioeconomic status or levels of education. Your criteria
is the color of your skin. Is
going to be the color of your skin, and specifically your race. Because when even today, you go to the bank, even though we've said black, who is black in South Africa, right? It's all your non-whites. Indians benefit from BEE, the Chinese community benefit from BEE, the colored community benefit from BEE. If you're coming out from outside South Africa and you are Spanish, you are not going to be classified as a South African Caucasian. When you fill out those forms, you still cannot tick the one box that says black. There is black, African, colored, Indian, Chinese, and comically, there's a section that says other.
I don't know, yeah. I've seen it. I've seen other.
What
is other?
Please specify.
I wish I could think other.
You know, and I always think of Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
Who's cross race.
I don't know what you would cross.
You Michael Jackson, what do you tick in that box? And you know, the 7 pillars of BEE still have different weighing, you know, how they quantify whether your company ticks the box for BEE purposes. It still matters what the ratio of Black Africans is versus Black but colored or Black but Indian.
Yeah, I think in fact now what they've done is they've moved away from just black and white. They call it an AIC, like they specify the African, the Indian, and the colored, and I think there's also specific numbers that need to be met. But I think whilst that rule or whilst that policy exists, I certainly in many corporates, I mean, I had a conversation the other day around women in leadership and executive roles within this in South Africa. I mean, there's no shift there at all. There isn't. So I'm not sure, you know, if they're applying it just for the tick box exercise. I don't know what happens to the people once they've appointed, or I really don't. But there's an additional question I want to add in relation to this policy specifically of employment equity. Allan, do you think that there should be an expiry date to that policy? I mean, 27 years later.
I think it's a more important question to ask, and I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
So I've given it some thought, and the analogy that I have is: imagine you're a 10-year-old child, right? And you're sitting on the side of the road, you're starving, you haven't eaten in 3-4 days, you're starving, and this guy walks up to you, and he's got this pizza, this massive pizza. He's like, "Yeah, I've got this whole big pizza. I can't eat it all. Would you like to have some?" And this 10-year-old kid is like, fucking starving, I need to eat some. So they eat this pizza. And as they finish it, this cop walks past and says, "You stole this pizza. You guys stole, I know you stole this pizza." And he's about to lock him away in the van. The guy who stole the pizza says, "You know what, actually, I stole the pizza. I saw this boy and I could see he was really hungry, so I gave him some." And the cop says, "Okay, well, let's check that. Check the CCTV, they check it out. They can 100% verify that this child had nothing to do with it." But it comes to taking off the handcuffs, and the policeman says, "No, I'm not taking the handcuffs off because you benefited from eating that pizza. And not only am I going to punish you for eating that pizza, but I'm going to punish your children for eating that pizza." I was born in 1979. When I was 10 years old, I went to a multiracial boarding school in 1990. I lived with black people. I slept next to them. I was there, you know. So for me, at the age of 10, I had no role, I had no authority, I had no part in the apartheid system, the system that you've been talking about that categorized and broke people up. But yet I'm being held accountable for the sins of my parents and the parents before them and the society in general before me, simply because of the color of my skin. And now when my boy gets to the age of 18 and he goes to try and find employment, and he said, "Sorry, you can't even come. You can't even come to this interview because you're white." My mom taught me something very, that's true to my heart. Is that 2 wrongs don't make a right. And in my world, this is creating an even bigger barrier between races in this country. So my philosophy should be that anybody who was born in a time where they didn't actively have a choice in apartheid should be considered born free and not be applied to the EEAA principles. Anybody who was for the rest of their life, whatever the case. But if you're going to discriminate, and that for me is just simply a form of discrimination, it's taking what was the apartheid system and applying it to whites who had nothing to do with that apartheid system. And how many years, how many legacies, how many grandkids must experience this? And ask yourself, you know, for me the most important thing with this whole discussion is being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. So when I was about 18, 19, I put myself in a black person's shoes because I said, well, how did I become white? I didn't ask to be born white, male. This is not my choice. What if I was born male, white, or black in South Africa? How would I have felt having my land taken away? I came to the realization that I'd be blowing shit up and shooting stuff left, right, and center as well. But at the same time, you know, we need to be able to put ourselves into the shoe of a young white person who had nothing to do with apartheid. But he's being told you are guilty of something.
Here's a question
and we're going to punish you for it.
Yeah, here's a question for you. I completely agree with the statement that you've made, because someone who was born in 1990 had no role to play.
I was born
right?
in 1979.
Yeah,
you still
had no role, right? So, but here's a question that I've always asked, because that analogy, I mean, that's what I have lots of friends that are white, and as a result, we sit around the table, and that's exactly what we're saying. So, when I grew up in Soweto, you know, my grandmother, great-grandmother, my great-grandmother, in fact, said that they used to stay in Sophia Town, and they were moved to Ezola in Soweto. And when my great-grandmother passed away, you know, obviously her kids inherit the house. Then, you know, if those parents die, then the next children inherit the house. Now, and with understanding of what you've said, there's no possibility that I could inherit a house in Bryanston or in Fourways or in the suburbs. I can only inherit a house in Soweto, which is linked to the systematic ways, which is why they live there. So whilst the 10-year-old boy today played no role, in my thinking is, you know, he's going to inherit his father's house or his grandfather's house in Parktown as a result of that system. So he didn't have a role, but the benefits of those that had a role before him will somehow fall into his hands. So we've got to find a balance. And I completely agree with you. As a society today, we've got to find a balance to be able to not completely ignore and neglect those that didn't play a role. But my 10-year-old and your 10-year-old, you know, the start is not equal.
Yours probably had an advantage over mine.
Not really, Allan. What I'm saying is, if your 10-year-old stands to inherit a house in Parktown and mine stands to inherit a house...
So you see, and that's the problem, is that we categorize a person as white.
Right.
And we place these assumptions on them. I can tell you right now that in my house growing up, for a 10-year period, I carried water and boiled it so that I could bath, because we couldn't afford to bring water into the house. Okay?
Yeah.
So that house, I'm not inheriting. That house has saved my parents in their retirement. But not even that, because that house was close to Soweto.
Yeah.
And when Soweto and the squatter camps, it lost all of its value.
Yeah.
So ultimately, you're assuming that we're going to get this. What I can tell you is that I live on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis. So when I say to you, your child has probably had a better, more advantageous upbringing than my child, it's not coming from an illusion. It's coming from looking at your house that you're living in. It's coming from seeing where I've been and how hard I've had to work to make my own business.
Yeah.
So corporate, I had a ladder. Well, I couldn't advance further in a corporate. When I got to Cape Town, the corporate that I was in, I took a look around. Shit, there's one white guy running the show. There's one coloured female manager. All the rest are white females. I'm like, wow, there's no hope.
There's no hope for a male here.
What I do is impossible for me to grow.
Yeah.
So in that regard, you know what, I'm so grateful for affirmative action.
Yeah.
Because what it's done is it allowed me to connect to my dream, what I want to do in life, as opposed to following somebody else's.
Someone else's, yes.
And that for me, we're giving the white race that ability to go out and create their dreams and taking it away from blacks, because we're saying, okay, you can go and have your job. What about your dream? What about going and creating a business so that you can employ 1,000 blacks? And we lift the black community up by educating people. That for me is the biggest issue that's happening today. Is the last 30 years, we haven't educated much.
Yeah. Thulisa?
Well, I think, you know, Allan is stating where he's coming from.
Yeah, his position as a white person,
who is not necessarily the Oppenheimer, who is going to, you know, inherit the mines and you name it. And I think we need to be careful with this narrative, because certainly not all whites were wealthy whites, even during apartheid. It's been documented where Big Water used to speak about the poor white problem. where amongst the white community, there were the poor whites who were ostracized. Right.
Ostracized were together with the blacks.
Yes,
yeah.
You're white, but you're poor. You know, you don't have. You've got nothing to do with the mining and, whatever other business consortiums. And we also need to not make the mistake of saying that if you're black, you are therefore disadvantaged.
True.
Because we had many black people. Look at somebody like that my boy.
Yeah.
He's an entrepreneur and a businessman, and you know, this is in the middle of black apartheid South Africa.
Yeah.
And also,
and he did extremely well.
Yes.
Yes.
And certainly not every single black person who exited this country and found themselves overseas was there as a political exile. We had people that were educated. Let's take your Forte University. Yeah, that decided to actually leave the country. And leave the country for their own reasons. For their own reasons, yes. And they have they've never been a part of the political discourse to start with. And they keep to themselves with their resources and wealth. And these are black people who live even better than white people. Yeah. And so we need to be careful with okay, I'm black. I came from Soweto, we were all removed. Because just the same, you've got that black kid who's like, I don't know what you're talking about. My parents were South African, I grew up in London, we always had cars, and today they're still driving their Bentley, and they still, in some ways, we've got a white corporate doing more, engaging in more corporate social responsibility than these other black people.
I'm not sure if I understand what you're saying by that. Are you saying that
you're black madam, so to speak.
Okay.
So let's just say I come from that one family where my father went to Oxford in the 70s. I grew up in London, I make it, I come back, I convert my pounds into rands. I'm a day from today.
Correct.
I'm chilling, I'm happy.
Yeah.
Right. Allan over here is running his own company. And they run corporate social investment initiatives where they take care of children with cancer, that kind of thing. I'm black and I'm not. And I don't even care about.
But what's that got to do with racism? Are you saying, what's that? What's the point?
In a sense, it's internalized. Because there's an arrogance about it that says, I'm not one of the blacks that suffered. I'm in the same league as Okay, so leave me alone.
But you see, right there, you're saying you're in the same league to a white person, which means that, there's that aspiration. Because the white person is still considered to be this.
Yes.
Right.
So there's internalized racism here. Because I'm still using white as the bar.
Well, because you were taught and it was legal. It was legalized that the white is the bar.
Yes. I look at my face in the mirror, baby, and I don't like it.
Because it's not white enough. I'm
going to have surgery to, And
people are bleaching today. They're bleaching their skin.
I'm going to bleach my skin. I'm going to narrow this nose. And I'm going to tell them to extract these things in my back because I don't like it. I'm starting to look like a black mama.
Yeah.
So
whose responsibility is it to control that?
It's everyone's. Is
it my responsibility to control his mindset?
Not at all.
No.
Not at all.
Is it your responsibility to control mine?
Not at all.
It's up to Michael Jackson. You mentioned him earlier.
Yeah.
Man in the Mirror. Go listen to the words of that song.
Yeah.
Because that paints it right there. It's up to each individual to look within and see what is the same. How are we categorizing? How are we judging this group of people? If it's a negative, well, realizing firstly that any description, any label, is the word bottle this bottle? The word bottle. Is it this bottle? Is the word bottled this bottle?
No. The word bottle is bottle.
The word bottle is just a word that describes it. But in our brains, we equate the word to the reality of who we think the person is. So when I see, like I said earlier, and we categorize myself as a rich black or a poor black or a rich white or a poor white, then I see the world through that dirty window.
Yeah.
It's absolutely a natural condition of the subconscious brain to function in that way. Because it's got us to this point in terms of survival. If it hadn't been for this, we wouldn't be here as a species.
Yeah.
We would have been eaten by lions a long time ago and not made it to where we are. We're devious, we're manipulative, we're controlling, because it's got us to where we are. But we now have 7.5 going on 8 billion people on this earth. Take it back 100 years. We didn't have a third of it. We had maybe, 2 billion.
Yeah.
So the population is not only increased, but our ability to communicate with every single other person has increased as well. So what are we doing as a species? We're now growing together. We're growing in morality. We're growing through understanding that discrimination in any form is not acceptable. Discrimination for me, whether it be racism, xenophobia, gender-based violence, is all discrimination.
Yeah.
We can't place one above the other one and say this one is wrong, this one is better and better. But if we understand the root cause of discrimination, the me and you, that's it, right there. As soon as we separate ourselves from man, racism is a guarantee, discrimination is a guarantee.
Yeah. And
you said it's not possible to get to that space, and I beg to differ.
Well, I don't know if it's possible, and I think and that's purely my experience because of how I see things happen. And I think it leads me to my next question to say, you know, and it's so difficult for. We've seen in cases of Vicky Momberg, we've seen Penny Sparrow. It seems that it's such a difficult thing that, you know, for white people to accept that, you know, we are equals because they still see black people as inferior. I mean, you know, such statements such as monkeys and, you know, we're making the beaches of their beaches filthy. I mean, how is it even their beaches? You know what I mean? So
how's it anybody's beach?
How is it anybody's beach? Exactly.
It's an illusion.
So, and I agree with you. It's if it's so, you're saying that we're all responsible to change our mindset. If somebody can make a statement publicly in that way, and as the current government having to criminalize the word kafir because. You know,
it's still in use.
Because people are just finding it difficult not to use it.
Somebody said it to me like 2 days ago. Like saw me saying that I was that.
Why the hell would they say that to you?
I was playing a video game and I killed it.
Oh gosh. So you see, for me, you know, it's still difficult. And when you know, and I see everyone on social media gets very angry and you know, and I always say exactly what you're saying to say, I don't care if someone thinks I'm inferior. I don't feel inferior, right? But such statements are a driver to, you know, driving this unity that we're supposed to be having as a country.
The unity we're supposed to be having, nothing will show you that we're still not there yet. Nothing will show you like bringing home a member of a different race.
Yeah.
You know, we can sit here and say, no, I'm over it, I'm not racist. But watch what happens. I have a friend, really white guy, who said he grew up with a very racist father whose attitudes are just somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
And it's helped for him, like Allan, to have gone to school with black kids and
because then it's the experience is different.
Everything, you know, he would love it if you took him home to Ezra, to that house. He just had a great time. So he met his wife.
A black chick.
Yes. And, you know, he would bring it, he told me to bring it up to the family hypothetically.
Wow.
So, Mom, how would you feel if I, you know, brought home a black woman? And all along, they're like, oh no, it's fine.
It's fine.
You know, this is the new South Africa. And the day he did,
all hell broke
there
loose.
was tension around that dinner table. They let him and his now wife leave.
Wow.
But apparently afterwards, there were conversations within the family about how do we let somebody who's at the same level as our helper come in as a family member.
Wow.
As in, now this woman is going to
She's having dinner with us. She's not serving the dinner.
Yeah. She's going to sleep in our linen.
Wow.
She's going to use
the same cup.
She's going to bear our grandchildren.
Yes. Even worse.
Yes.
Even worse.
That was
wow.
things just went out of control.
This is recent.
This is early 2000s.
Wow.
That this happens. And he said, so the family, he decided to split with the family, right, and stick
to the wife, obviously.
And boy, what happened when she had to introduce him.
Yo.
Umlungu.
Yay. Jani.
Umlungu. La.
Yes.
You, Janami, of all the men in the world. Umlungu.
Wow.
After the slavery and apartheid.
Yes, after what they did to us.
Yes.
Yeah, I can just hear the mom say that.
We are going to get killed,
Oh.
La. Do yourself a favor and find yourself a good black man.